Welcome to the Football Science Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the physiology, biomechanics and anatomy of the world of football. Hi and welcome back to the Football Science Podcast. I'm Shayne, joined by my co-host Joe. We're here talking about what makes elite footballers, so delving into sort of the physical and maybe some of the psychological observations that I've noticed over working with some of the best players in the world. And Joe, let's get into it.
Perfect. So I know you've got certain criteria that you believe to be the reasons why elite players are elite. Do you want to jump straight into it and just give us an explanation of what to you makes an elite player?
Yeah. Before I lunge both feet into it, I almost want to go, what do we mean by elite? Because any of these players that are playing in the Premier League, World Cup, whatever, they're all elite because they're the 1% of the 1%. But there is something that separates the real, and we all know who they are, the top, maybe 5, 10 in the world. This is what we're kind of talking about. And like there's two obviously that stand out that have been at the top for quite a considerable amount of time, and the gap between Messi and Ronaldo and say the next one is massive. Like there's more gap I think between the top few than there is from the 100 to the 200. You know, the 100 to 200 players are almost kind of similar in some
Seems
ways
that way, yeah,
or they differentiate up and down, but the ones at the real top, to get into the top 10 say in the world, takes a hell of a, and to maintain at the top 2 is I think
incredible. It's that consistency that makes them two come to mind. You think about maybe the last winners of the Ballon d'Or, like the great players, but Messi, Ronaldo seem to have done it for the best part of like 10-15 years, which is just a crazy amount of time to be at the top of your sport.
Yeah, it's incredible, and it's a massive credit to them and the people around them and the people that support them and stuff like that, because it's relentless to get to that level. To maintain that for so long is we may never see it again for a long time, But of my observations, obviously, I haven't seen those two in particular in person, but I've seen elite, and maybe I'm not talking about the top 1% of the 1%. We're talking about just elite athletes in general, and the ones that obviously go on to really big things, And there's sort of 5 traits. But before I get into that, I think the movement is, again, we've said this before, I think movement is a precursor to this. They have to move well. Generally, they all quite move well, the ones at the very top. But then these are probably more psychological and more environmental, or things that have happened to them. And the first one I would say, from what I noticed, they're quite motivated. They're extremely motivated. Now, they know exactly what they want. You almost ask them, what do you want to win? I want to win the World Cup. I want to win the Ballon d'Or. I want to win. They almost know what they want, so they're very focused. They're not kind of meandering through their career. They're very determined to achieve something. So I would say very, very heavily motivated, and that's intrinsically and extrinsically. That's internally and what's environment. So the more environment, the better the environment they're around, the more motivated they are. But they have something internal as well that drives them forward. They're also extremely intelligent for their environment. Now, I know footballers kind of get a bashing on, maybe not the most smartest guys in the world or whatever, but that's just what test you put in front of them. If you test them in their football, they're the most intelligent you've ever met. They're extremely intelligent. What they have to do, how they read the game, where to position their body, how to turn up, how to whatever. They're just for their environment. They're extremely intelligent. The other thing, I think, what separates the elite from the non-elite is how fast they do it. They get there early. Like you look at Messi when he made his debut, 16, like young. Like these players that make it to the very top, they make it early. They go early because they have a longer career than at experiencing their trade, trialing at the highest level. Look at Jude Bellingham now for England. Amazing what he's doing, at such a young age.
He looks years ahead of someone who is his age. He almost looks like, a 28-year-old player, but I don't even know how old he is, but I know he's not 28.
19,
he's a young guy.
Yeah,
who looks years ahead, mature.
Imagine, very intelligent, or his position, what he has to do on the pitch. I'd imagine he's highly motivated. He knows what he wants to do. He's fast. He's got there quick. The other two things that I've kind of observed is that they're very stress tolerant. There's a lot going on in their lives. Now we only see their football. We only see one entity of them. But it's high stress as well, even in that environment. If you compare it to a businessman, or you compare it to anyone working in any industry, it's a high stress in terms of the expectation of them, their family burden that they may have, the stuff, the external out there, the pressures of social media, being so young, being 19. I mean, 19, we're all idiots at 19.
The pressure on 19-year-olds must be immense, especially, playing for your country and a big, massive club. Like, I know Bellingham's at a massive club. There's talk of him going to a arguably even bigger club, but the pressure must be immense for someone at that age. So, yeah, the mindset they must have must be second to none.
Yeah, and so they have to handle a lot of those pressures, and they have to handle them across many times, and it fluctuates as well. You get high pressure situations and you get lower pressure situations, but it's also hard. Like, sometimes they love the buzz, and when the buzz comes off, they have to handle themselves then also, the buzz of the game. So they'll have to be professional when they leave the game, because then they're just back to kind of being normal people again. Normal things apply to them, if you know what I mean. Obviously there's certain things that doesn't apply to them, but you know what I mean. The buzz is gone a little bit now. They're back in their own rooms, or they're back in their own home life, and they have to manage that stress as well, so there's a lot of things going on. And the final thing I would say about them is they're very persistent. Right, so the baseline is failure, right? So you look at the Premier League, right, and okay, one or two teams have been dominated for the last number of years, but not everyone who plays in the Premier League who's elite, anyone who plays Premier League, I think would be elite. Maybe not the top elite, but they're elite, and they're 1% of the 1%, right? Majority of them, I don't know how much percentage, but 90% of them, 85% of them won't win a trophy, won't get medals. So what are they playing for? Do you know what I mean? They're not always playing for trophies. Okay, the best in the world do play for trophies, but if you're at a mid-table Premier League team, which is no small feat, many people fail to get to that level. They're maybe not winning. Maybe they can win an FA Cup or a league trophy, but they're not going to. Where's the medals coming from? Where's the real success? They might win games during the week, but over the course of the season, you get like 10 years in, you go, I haven't actually won a trophy, but I've been an elite athlete. So they have to be very persistent in what they do. You know what I mean? They can't just can't just turn up for big games and big.
They're not there to just make up the numbers. They're there because they see value in what they do, but they want to be better. Yeah, they always want to be better.
Yeah.
Do you find? So obviously you've touched on the likes of Bellingham, who we're seeing now is potentially going to be a world-class player in just a few years.
Yeah.
I know obviously you've worked yourself with some amazing players. I know you spoke like of the players at City and at Scotland as well. Do you find the best players are able to deal with the outside world a little bit better? Or, I know I've seen recently Rio Ferdinand saying that he never actually enjoyed playing because it was such a big thing playing at that level that he actually never really enjoyed the games, which, to a lot of people, that's maybe a shame, but to someone who maybe just cares about competition, they're not there to enjoy. They're there to actually win at all costs. And we've seen that from the likes of Ferdinand in his career. He was an out and out winner. Yeah, he won pretty much everything. Well, he won everything at club level, if I remember correctly. Yeah, and even at international level, he represented his country many a time. Considered one of the best centre backs that the Premier League's ever seen. So, do you find that the players who can deal with stress off the pitch can almost perform better when they're on the pitch, or is it a mixture? Is it just depend on the player itself?
No, I think that ties into the stress tolerance. They have to, psychology always trumps physiology, so the psychology isn't right, or they're off, they're off piece for whatever reason. They got too much in their head and they've come over, hit a threshold where it's gone past what they can deal with. Then that affects them physiologically and affects them psychologically and physiologically. Then the performance starts to dip, So I think they have to manage the stress now. And now it's a part of that is having a good support network around you, because you might find yourself being in a different world to maybe your counterparts who are just normal everyday people. They don't have the same constraints that you have if you're a footballer. So, but having a good support network around you, I think, is important. A good family structure, a good, maybe good agent, maybe a good person, a friend, maybe someone to lean on. And I think the best I've always I've seen they have a good support network around them, and the people will do things for them and take load off them and all that. But they also have one or two people that can be honest with them. Have the honest conversations. Tell them when they're not doing what they need to do. Tell them the truth. Yeah. Tell them the truth. And I think the truth is one of the hardest things ever to say. But I think players do need that. And from my So I work with some individual players at the minute, and some play in the Premier League, and sometimes it's about just having open and honest conversations with them about whatever it is that's, you know, because maybe they get people that are maybe afraid to say certain things because they don't want to annoy the person or whatever. But you can't brush, you know, all issues under the table and or under the mat and hopefully it goes away. Like, some things need to be aired out, some things we've talked about, some things need to be elaborated on, and I think players need to have a trust in someone to have those conversations with, and I think they're only good long term.
I think, yeah, like you're saying there, long term. So, you know, if you're working closer to a player and you're not maybe telling them everything that they should hear and just what they on the skin surface want to hear, over time, if something happens and maybe, say, for example, they get an injury and they're not playing, and then that, it builds up, the tension builds up, the stress builds up, they're no longer getting back in the team, they struggled, they've signed someone new, and that player's now second choice in that position, and then they might, you know, ultimately turn against the coach and say, you know, why didn't you tell me this 6 months, 12 months, 18 months ago? And now, really, if anything, you're the one to blame because you've just not told them what you really should have told them at a time when they just needed the truth. So I can imagine that being almost like a sticky thing to do, where you've got to tell a player something that might not be the most positive, but for their progression is the most important thing to tell them.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's like a few things need to be right, you know, before you can go and just be honest with someone, you know. Like,
you got to build that relationship up first.
I think you do. Like, honest, and they have to know it's come from the right place, you know. They have to, and maybe sometimes because I'm removed from a club at the minute, I can have better conversations with a player because I'm not picking the team, or I'm not necessarily going to the manager. Not that I'd be picking the team anyway, but you know what I'm saying. I'm not influencing their manager per se.
There's no agenda there.
No, and it's like, you know, you have problems you sometimes yourself, and you may not go to always your family members, for instance. You don't want to burden them with something, so you become that person that they can go to without having a huge consequence to their just everyday life. They can just have the offload and then move on. And I think players need to have that sort of thing. We all do need to have that, but I think players in particular need to have those honest and open conversations with people.
So obviously you're coming at it from a coach to player aspect. What's the dynamic like, without going into too many, like, you know, we need to gossip about anything, but players with each other? You know, you hear stories about Roy Keane. He always demanded the most out of players around him. Similar to with Michael Jordan in basketball, he always wanted the most. He always dug players out. Probably got away with it because he was amazing. It probably wouldn't work if maybe he wasn't so good, but because he was the best of the best, people respected him for digging them out because it motivated them. Do players have those conversations with each other, or is that they leave that to the coaches, and only the coaches should be touching those subjects? They don't want to be digging out someone who's a teammate because, you know, you might look negative, it might not work. Sometimes it's not always the best thing. You've got to pick your battles almost.
You do. Yeah.
Do players help each other in that respect and just say, look, like, you know, maybe change this, or you shouldn't be doing that? Or we see it in games where players shout at each other. Yeah. But off the pitch, where things might be a bit more relaxed day to day, you know, they're in the gym, they're getting physio, they're getting rubbed down. What's the dynamic like there?
I think players are quite good with a level of conflict, you know, because they get it all the time. So they're more than happy to almost do it in a jovial way. And it depends on the environment, you know. If it's in the changing room, things might get said that are heated and whatever. But, you know, environments are different. Some environments it's all led by the coach, or some environments it might be where the coach is hoping his players lead, or asks his players to lead it himself. You know, but the Real Madrid, the Galacticos, like that was like the manager managed a few players and then they managed their team. So yeah, I think it's different in different environments. But I think some players, and I've seen it so often, that players do, if they have a relationship with each other, they can again go back to the whole, they trust each other, so they can have a bit of a wind up of each other, and then at the same time let them know that what they're doing isn't good enough or whatever. So there's different approaches, and it comes back to personality. But I don't think players shy away from sort of conflict.
No, definitely. Like, I mean, it's almost like, you know, you'd have like an older brother who, you know, if you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, they will be the first one to say, look, don't do that. I know there's stories of like Gerrard, when new players come in, he would make an assessment on the player straight away, which seems quite harsh, but obviously he did have an amazing career. He won quite a lot with Liverpool, you know, represented his own country. So that mentality, which ties back into, you know, the individual player expecting a lot more from your, you know, your colleagues, because that's what they are. You're working alongside them every day, so you need to be able to trust them. But also that trust plays into the fact that sometimes you have to just tell people how it is.
Yeah, and yeah, like I said before, I think you want to be open and candid with people, and it's one of the hardest things to do in the world. And I think eventually people respect that, as long as it's done in the right way, done in the right manner. It takes a lot for someone to be honest with you, you know, like your best mate or whatever it might be.
Takes a level of maturity.
It does, and then for you to receive it as well. You know, you often hear players try to help them and they don't want to listen, and it's further down the line they go, he was right what he said, and I just wasn't in the place to listen to. And maybe some of it comes down to like almost just. I talk this with a lot of athletes around like goal setting. So when you're goal setting something, you might say, oh, what's your goal, right? You've said about being motivated. I think motivation is a characteristic of a elite performer. So you try and delve into that by goal setting, right? And goal setting is important for footballers and us alike, we'll say, right? So when you delve into it and you ask someone, what's your goal, right? They might be very vague on what they want to achieve. Now, the vagueness comes for two reasons. One, maybe they don't know how the goal is set, but two is they don't want to know if they failed or not. So they keep it vague, so it's ambiguous whether they achieved it or not. You know, it's like I've had it before where people may run in a 5K, for instance, right? And they're trying to get a sub 20, and then they come back and they go, I did it in 20 seconds, or 20 minutes and 15 seconds. They go, I could have done that, I could have beaten. No, you couldn't. No, you couldn't, and no, you didn't. Until you do it, you haven't done it. Yeah. So you have to be very explicit to people and say it as it is, and call out the sort of the weakness, if you like, or the kind of the lack of like accountability that they might put on themselves. And that maybe short term is a little bit hard to take for some people. But I always say, like, we're dealing with dreams and aspirations when we're dealing with footballers, right? So it's a serious entity, it's a serious thing, right? And the career is not very long. So I don't have time to be sugarcoating things for players. No. I want to be honest with a player. As long as they know it's come from the right place, I always try and be honest with a player, and the players, I think, respect it long term, but maybe initially, maybe not for some. But I think we all, if someone's been honest and they're saying it for the right reasons, I think we listen.
I think you mentioned accountability there. You got to be accountable for yourself as well. Like, are you being a responsible coach if you do sugarcoat something when in reality they don't need that, you know, they're not going to get to the next step if you always tell them, you know, everything's amazing, you're doing amazing, but in reality they could be doing more, or they just, you know, need to have a little bit of you know, self-reflection on what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes down to maybe yourself as a practitioner. Maybe you're a bit young yet and you're insecure yourself, or you're not at the level you should be yet personally, so you almost can't be, you know, hold people honest. So as you get older and you get more mature and you have more responsibility in your life, you realize that these honest conversations need to be had. So then you transfer them onto your coaching kind of platform, and I think that's important.
I think when we look at, you know, players, and we see players in the, you know, the Premier League, Champions League, La Liga, whatever you know, whatever we're looking at, we tend to just go, well, they're a professional footballer, so therefore that's it. But you know, people's careers tail off. We see people go for, you know, huge sums, and then it doesn't quite work out. Sometimes it's not their fault. Sometimes they've been at a small club, but, you know, the bids come in and they've left, and then they're at a bigger club and they don't look so good. Or there's something going on behind the scenes, that they're not getting the right coaching, which I'm sure can happen even at big clubs. Sometimes they're not getting the right advice, or it's just not transferring into game time. My point is, do you think sometimes that players, although they might have a physical ability, they might be big, they might be strong, they might be able to jump, you know, whatever height, do you find that some players, you need the mixture of all these things? You can't just be physically better than someone else. You've got to have all these factors. You've got to have the motivation, you've got to be intelligent, you've got to be, you know, physical as well, but you need a mixture of all these things to be a top player.
Yeah, it's so demanding. I think you need to be psychologically robust, and that's probably why a lot more psychologists are coming into the world of football. And I think a bit like when sports science came in, they're almost trying to find their feet, and there's some really good practice going on. And I think when you look at a player psychologically, you want to look at them in the the best environment, which is the game, you know, how they respond to game and all that, and then you can help them out massively. And you hear loads of footballers coming out talking about the psychological game, you know, like they're having issues, the way they think about the game, the way they analyze their own game. It's probably not, it's probably counterintuitive to their development, and then they get skilled on it, and then they acquire those skills, and they almost train their brain like they train any part of their body. I think that's coming more and more into the game. But yeah, you're right, even from a physical point of view though, there isn't one physical attribute that a player needs to be successful. They almost need a blend of both. And it's the one sport, I think, out there, maybe there's others, right, but there's definitely football is a one sport whereby no physical attribute wins. Like we had Usain Bolt, the fastest man in the world, play football, and he didn't like rip it up or anything, you know what I mean? So he was the best at that, right? So it's the blend of both. Like you have to be able to accelerate well, you have to be able to decelerate well, you have to be able to sprint reasonably well. You can't be slow, you know, generally speaking. Okay, you can get away with it if you're technically really good, but it's also the blend of how tactically you manage the game. Technically, are you good? But how you play the game has an impact on which attribute you need more or less of. And then it's psychological, you know, like the game is 90 minutes and you see players just kind of give up after 60 or start to deteriorate after 60. And is that psychologically or is that physically? Or there's so much going on. And I think football is the one sport we have such a blend of different attributes that make success, and it's all a different recipe. Like it's all different ingredients that make the player. And even if you look at positional, it doesn't differentiate either, because you have strikers, you know, you go back in the day, you had Michael Owen and Peter Crouch, both obviously different strikers, but both played in the same position to a degree, right? So you have a discrepancy across football, even in positions. Like centre half, you have different centre half. Look at Martinez and you look at Ruben Diaz, for instance. Like they're very different, you know.
It's just there seems to be like, you know, so many different styles to obviously the positions, and then you've got, you know, how managers influence the game. You know, we see, you know, when like the tiki-taka football first came about, and now it seems like most clubs just want to control the ball, and then you've got teams who maybe just want to, you know, close off and defend. So there's obviously even in that there's different styles of how teams play, and a player's obviously got to do a job for the team. So sometimes if a manager's saying do this is how we're going to play, that might change his own personal development, because that's necessarily not going to play to his strengths, because some players, they just love attacking, even if they're in a defensive situation. But if they're in a team where it's, you know, defend and control the ball, then it's going to change how we perceive that player in that position as well. So it seems like there's a lot of things that can go wrong in someone's career and almost alter the course of whether or not we deem them as a successful player, because it seems like a really hard thing to do, to navigate the world, and as you've touched on here, there's many things that need to go right, but it seems like there's a lot more things that can go wrong in a player's career before they develop past these certain levels. And then it almost makes you appreciate the likes of Ronaldo and Messi, who have done it so well for so long. And you know, we're probably going to start seeing those two players slowly wind down now, just because of their age, and they've pretty much done everything, and we're going to potentially see one of them win the World Cup. We'll see how that plays out, but it almost gives you a great appreciation of, you know, these players have not only made it to, you know, professional football, but to progress past that requires another level of dedication and, like as you said, motivation.
No, it's there's loads to unpack there. I think it's essential for players to have like certain attributes if they're going to be successful. But I think if you could look at so many things, but if you look at the elite in the world, right, they're not well-rounded in everything. They're good in many things and elite in a few things, and that's probably something to understand. Even if you're amateur level football or semi-pro, or you're playing in the Premier League, whatever it is, I think you do have to have super strengths. Like you do have to have things and sharpen the sword and not try and work on every possible thing, because there'll always be chinks to the armor. There'll always be problems with your, you know, there'll all be weaknesses, right? And if you just focus on them all together and you try and get everything balanced and well-rounded, you almost don't offer enough to be better than the next person, you know, because every player that's played the game, whether they're elite or non-elite, there'll always be problems in their game, you know, whether they can't tackle or whether they can't win a header or whatever it might be, but they're amazing at certain things, you know what I mean? The best in the world, and even the ones in the Premier League, there's always something about them that makes them world class at what they do, or maybe not world class, but very, very good, and a Premier League level footballer. You know what I mean? So I think there's so many things to work on, and all the things give you added percentage and better fractions of success. But I do believe that players need to kind of understand what they offer. Do you know what I mean? And bring that to the table more often, because you know the best players in the world have that as well. You know, they you know, say for instance Messi doesn't cover the most ground in the world. You know, but unbelievable. Do you know what I mean?
I don't think anyone's going to knock him for
no,
that.
exactly. But what I'm saying is that you don't have to be totally rounded. You know what I mean? Like trying to cover all bases. Like I think you need to have certain things need to be in place. But I also then think you should really work on what is going to make you a better player.
So would that be your advice to, like, you know, anyone watching or listening who's looking, you know, how do I navigate the next 10, 12 years of my career? What do I work on? What do I look to fix or, you know, develop so that I can reach those levels, or at least reach levels that you didn't know you could attain?
Yeah, I think so. I think you can bombard yourself and drown yourself in the options that you could have. You know, I think there's many things to always work on. I do feel like if the weakness is really holding you back, of course you work on that. But if it's speed, and you could be working on speed, you know, forever, and not actually, you know, if that's not going to sharpen the sword, then I think you need to think about, well, what's going to make me a good footballer, what's going to make me an outlet, or what's going to help my game, you know, and keep me in the team. And I think if you can work on strengths as much as you do the weaknesses, I think then, you know, if you look at the elite level, you see it all the time. They have great attributes in many things, but they're usually super elite in other things. And I think you can have the same sort of approach or same sort of philosophy, you know, lower down the leagues.
There we go. So there's your advice for you if you're looking to break into that elite level. Shayne, thank you once again. It's been an amazing to sit down with you and listen to your talk.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Really enjoyed it. Guys at home, thanks for listening and watching in, and hopefully you took something from that, and see you again soon.